The Vorkari had hunted across the stars for centuries. To them, the thrill of the hunt was everything. Their kind did not fight wars for conquest or expansion. They did not seek wealth or resources. They sought only the challenge of the chase, the rush of the kill, and the honor of bringing home trophies. Across countless worlds, they had tested their strength against the fiercest creatures and the most advanced species, and each time, they had proven themselves the superior hunters. Now, a new planet had caught their attention. A blue world, orbiting a yellow star, teeming with life. The scans from their ship had confirmed the presence of an intelligent species. They called themselves humans. They had spread across their world, building cities, shaping the land, and waging wars among themselves. Primitive in some ways, but formidable in others. More than that, the Vorkari's long-range sensors had detected something unusual. There was no clear apex predator ruling over them. In every world the Vorkari had hunted before, there had always been a species that dominated all others, either through brute strength, speed, or cunning. But on Earth, humans had no natural weapons, no claws, no fangs, no overwhelming physical superiority. And yet, they ruled their world. This puzzled the Vorkari. How could such a species thrive when they were, by all logic, prey? The answer could only be discovered in the hunt. If the humans could be easily taken down, then they were nothing more than another weak species waiting to be conquered. But if they fought back, if they provided a true challenge, then the Vorkari would have finally found a worthy opponent. It was a thrilling thought. The hunting ship, the Vralok, approached the planet silently. The Vorkari had perfected the art of stealth. Their ships could slip past planetary defenses unnoticed, their technology masking their presence from all but the most advanced detection systems. They had studied Earth's defenses and found them laughably outdated compared to the galaxy's standards. There were no orbital security grids, no planetary shields, no deep space patrol fleets. It was almost too easy. Inside the dark metal corridors of the Vralok, the hunting team prepared. They were clad in armor made from the bones of their past kills, their weapons sharpened and ready. Among them was Krallis, one of the most skilled hunters in the Vorkari ranks. He had hunted on over 50 worlds and had never failed to claim a trophy. His body was covered in scars, each one a reminder of battles fought and won. This hunt would be no different. He would be the first to spill human blood. The ship's systems confirmed their landing site, a vast forested region, away from the human cities. The hunt would begin in silence. No alarms would be raised, no warnings given. The first humans would be taken without a sound. The Vorkari would observe, study their prey, and learn how they reacted to fear. Then they would spread out, taking more and more, pushing the humans into panic. The hunt would become a storm of blood, and in the end, the Vorkari would prove, once again, that they were the supreme predators of the galaxy. The ship landed smoothly in the dense forest, its black hull blending with the shadows. The ramp lowered, and the hunters moved like ghosts into the night. Krallis led the way, his keen eyes scanning for movement. The air was filled with unfamiliar scents, the sounds of insects and nocturnal creatures filling the silence. But he ignored them. He was looking for something else, something sentient, something that could fight back. It did not take long. A small human settlement lay ahead, just beyond the trees. Wooden cabins, smoke rising from chimneys, the soft glow of artificial lights. It was isolated, far from the major cities. The perfect place to begin. The hunters spread out, their movements silent, their weapons ready. Krallis signaled to the others. The first human would be taken alive. They needed to see how the species reacted under fear. They found a lone figure near one of the cabins, a human male, middle-aged, dressed in thick clothing, moving towards a shed. He carried no weapon, no sign of awareness that death lurked nearby. Krallis moved swiftly. In a heartbeat, he was behind the human, his clawed hand closing over the man's mouth. silencing any scream before it could begin. The man struggled, but Krallis was stronger. He dragged his prey into the shadows, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. The first capture was complete, but something was wrong. Before Krallis could signal the others, there was a sharp click. The sound was small, almost insignificant, but to an experienced hunter, it was the sound of something deadly, a weapon being readied. Krallis spun around, just in time to see the second human, a younger one, raising a long metallic object. There was no hesitation, no fear. The weapon fired. Pain exploded across Krallis's shoulder, the force sending him stumbling back. It was impossible. No species had ever reacted this quickly. No prey had ever fought back with such precision. He barely had time to process the shock before another shot rang out. One of the other hunters cried out as he was struck, his body crumpling to the ground. The forest came alive with movement. More humans emerged, weapons in hand, their eyes cold and focused. They were not panicked. They were not running. They were hunting. Krallis's mind raced. This was not how it was supposed to happen. The humans were supposed to be afraid. They were supposed to flee, to break under the pressure. But instead, they were standing their ground, striking back with calculated precision. The hunter had become the hunted. He had to fall back. This was not a retreat. Vorkeri did not retreat. It was a tactical reassessment. He let out a guttural roar, signaling the others. They vanished into the trees, their dark forms melting into the night. The humans did not pursue. Not yet. But their message was clear. The Vorkeri had miscalculated. This hunt was not going to be easy. Krallis clenched his teeth, feeling the burning pain in his shoulder. For the first time in his long, decorated career, he felt something unfamiliar. A feeling that no Vorkeri had ever associated with a hunt. Doubt. And beneath that doubt, something worse. Fear. The Vorkeri retreated into the dense forest, their bodies blending with the shadows as they moved in silence. Their pride burned hotter than their wounds. Never before had they faced prey that struck back with such precision. Krallis clenched his jaw, his injured shoulder throbbing. This was not a simple miscalculation. It was something far worse. They regrouped deeper into the wilderness, far from the human settlement. The other hunters examined their wounds, some minor, others more serious. One of their own had fallen, a Vorkeri warrior, killed by prey. The idea was unthinkable, yet it had happened. The humans had been prepared, not just with weapons, but with tactics, with an awareness that should not have been possible. Krallis's second-in-command, Vekril, crouched beside him. His sharp eyes glowed in the darkness. They knew, he growled in their native tongue. They were waiting for us. Krallis exhaled slowly. He had been thinking the same thing. The moment they had attacked, the humans had responded with ruthless efficiency. No hesitation, no fear. As if they had expected this. But that should not have been possible. The Vorkeri had chosen an isolated location, deep in the wilderness, away from major human populations. How could they have known? We test them again, Krallis decided. We strike a different group, observe their response. He glanced at the wounded. Those who cannot fight will return to the ship. The rest will move. Vekril bared his fangs. And if they are waiting for us again, Krallis tightened his grip on his blade. Then we will know the truth. They moved before the night ended, heading toward another human settlement. This one larger. The structures were more advanced, the lights brighter, a sign of greater human presence. But there was no sign of military fortifications, no defensive installations. This was not a fortress. It was a town. The hunters spread out, their movements soundless. Their plan was different this time. No live captures, no hesitation. They would strike fast and disappear just as quickly. A single kill would be enough to gauge the human reaction. Krallis sighted his target, a human walking alone near the edge of town. Young, distracted, a perfect kill. He drew his blade, a weapon honed across 100 hunts, and leaped from the shadows. Then everything went wrong. Bright lights snapped on from every direction, blinding him. A sharp whistle pierced the air, followed by an explosion of movement. The ground seemed to come alive with hidden figures, humans emerging from nowhere, weapons already aimed. Krellis barely dodged the first shot. He rolled, instincts kicking in, but the trap had already closed. The humans weren't just ready for them. They had anticipated them. Bullets tore through the air, cutting down two Vorkari hunters before they could react. Krellis spun, his mind racing. This wasn't natural. This wasn't normal. How had the humans known exactly where they would attack? A deep, rumbling voice cut through the chaos. "We knew you'd be back." Krellis turned sharply, his vision locking onto the human who had spoken. A large figure stood in the center of the ambush, clad in dark armor, a heavy rifle in his grip. His stance was relaxed, but his eyes burned with something Krellis had never seen in prey before. Amusement. "I hope you don't think we're easy prey," the human said, "because you're the ones being hunted now." Krellis's heart pounded. This wasn't just a failed hunt. This was a trap, and the Vorkari had walked straight into it. The moment the human spoke, Krellis felt a deep, unsettling chill crawl down his spine. It wasn't just the words that echoed in his mind. It was the certainty in the human's voice, the calmness, the readiness. The Vorkari had been the predators for so long that they could never have imagined a species, let alone a planet of them, that would turn the hunt against them with such ease. For a moment, Krellis stood still, assessing the scene. His mind raced, analyzing every detail, every movement. The humans were well organized. Their positions were tactical, each figure spread across the landscape with careful precision. There were no mistakes, no unnecessary movements. They had been prepared. They had expected the Vorkari to attack, and they had set a trap that was more than just a clever tactic. It was a message. The human in the center, standing with his weapon raised, did not show fear. He did not even flinch as the Vorkari regrouped and prepared to fight. He was calm, almost as if he was enjoying this moment. "We don't want to fight you," Krellis called out, his voice gruff with frustration, his mind still racing. He was trying to buy time, trying to make sense of the situation. He hadn't come to Earth to kill indiscriminately. He had come for the hunt. "We hunt for sport, not for bloodshed." The human's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Funny. I was just about to say the same thing to you." Without warning, the human raised his rifle, and before Krellis could react, the shot rang out, the blinding flash of light temporarily blinding him. A split second later, the sound of another Vorkari hunter hitting the ground echoed through the clearing. The force of the shot was unlike anything Krellis had ever felt before. The human's weapon was powerful, far more so than he'd ever imagined possible. The impact left the air thick with the smell of burning metal and the sharp scent of something far worse. Fear, not from the humans, but from him. Krellis's hand gripped his weapon tighter, his muscles tense. He could see the humans now, moving in synchronization. There were at least 20 of them, all armed, all trained. Not a single one seemed afraid of the Vorkari, not even the smallest childlike humans who were just beyond the reach of the soldiers. There was a unity to their movements, a disciplined coordination that was impossible to ignore. This wasn't a random ambush. It was an organized defense. They were prepared. They knew how to fight. They had fought before. Krellis growled in frustration, a low rumble building in his chest. His pride was bruised, his mind struggling to come to terms with this shift. He had always been the predator, and now, for the first time in his life, he felt like prey. The very idea made his blood boil. "We should pull back," Vekril whispered urgently, his voice tight. "We can't win this fight. Not with these numbers." "No," Krellis snapped, his voice a raw snarl. "We're not leaving. This hunt isn't over." The Vorkari had never retreated from a challenge. His honor would not allow it. The humans had made their mistake by daring to strike back, and now they would learn that the Vorkari were far from finished. But as Krallis scanned the battlefield once more, his determination faltered. The humans were closing in, tightening the circle around them. There was nowhere to go. There was no escape. This wasn't just a challenge. It was a full-scale war zone. The human leader, the one who had spoken earlier, began to walk forward. His rifle was slung over his back now, and his hands were raised in a gesture of non-aggression, but the deadly glint in his eyes never wavered. "You've made a grave mistake, alien," the human said softly, his tone almost casual, but the weight of his words was unmistakable. "We gave you a chance to leave peacefully. You should have taken it." Krallis's eyes narrowed. "We don't run from a challenge. Not ever." The human shook his head slowly. "You don't understand, do you? This isn't a challenge. You were never the hunters here. You were never the ones in control." Before Krallis could respond, a sharp noise rang out, like a whistle cutting through the air, and, in an instant, a series of explosions erupted in the forest behind them. The ground shook violently beneath their feet, and the trees were torn apart in an explosion of dirt and debris. The Valkyrie barely had time to react before more explosions followed, each one tearing through the earth with devastating force. The human leader's face remained unchanged, his voice carrying a dark amusement. "I told you we were ready." Krallis's heart pounded in his chest as he turned to face the chaos. The humans had prepared for them in ways the Valkyrie had never even considered. These weren't just humans with weapons. They were soldiers prepared for a war. The explosion wasn't random. It was timed perfectly. It was meant to disorient, to force the Valkyrie to fight at a disadvantage. "We need to fall back," Vekril insisted, his voice urgent. "They've set the stage. If we stay, we'll be slaughtered." But Krallis wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on the human leader, who was watching them, not with fear, but with a calm certainty. Krallis had never seen anything like it before. A predator should never show such confidence in the face of danger. But this human, he was unshaken. "No," Krallis finally growled. "Not yet." And then, the human leader spoke once more, his voice chilling in its finality. "We've been preparing for this moment for a long time, Valkyrie," he said. "And now it's your turn to learn what it means to be hunted." The ground rumbled again, and this time, the Valkyrie didn't have the luxury of time. Their world, everything they had come to expect, was about to change forever. Krallis's pulse quickened, and a cold dread settled deep in his chest. The human's words echoed in his mind like the beat of a war drum. "Now it's your turn to learn what it means to be hunted." The phrase felt like a prophecy, a cruel twist of fate. For the first time in his life, Krallis felt what it was like to be the prey. The explosion's shockwave had torn through the Valkyrie ranks, disorienting them. Several warriors had already fallen, caught in the blast, their bodies thrown into the air like ragdolls. The remaining Valkyrie were scrambling, their focus split between their enemies and their survival instincts. And then the humans moved. With a speed and precision that Krallis had never anticipated, they swarmed the Valkyrie, closing in from every direction. The human leader, the one who had spoken with such cold certainty, stood at the center of it all, his calm demeanor now replaced with a focused intensity. His hand went to his side, pulling a strange weapon from its holster. It was unlike anything Krallis had ever seen, sleek, compact, but deadly. Krallis barely had time to react before a sharp, high-pitched crack split the air, followed by the sound of another Valkyrie falling. A warrior at the front of the group was down, his chest obliterated in an instant by the human's weapon. The speed of it was terrifying. It wasn't just the power of the shot, it was the efficiency. The human had already moved, taking another target, as if his actions were part of a larger plan. It was a dance of death, and the humans were leading. "We're outmatched," Vekril said, his voice tight with panic. "We need to retreat now, or we'll all die here." Krallis's eyes locked on the human leader once more. The man stood among his soldiers, moving effortlessly, his eyes scanning the field with terrifying calm. He wasn't just commanding his people, He was watching them work with the precision of a master, ensuring everything went according to plan. The humans were trained, well prepared, and absolutely relentless. They were nothing like the soft, undisciplined prey Krallis had expected. "No," Krallis growled, his grip tightening around his weapon. He would not retreat. Not when his honor was on the line. "We're not leaving. We fight. We fight until we can't fight anymore." Vekril didn't respond, but his eyes darted around the battlefield, searching for an escape. The Vorkari were now scattered, fighting for their lives. The humans had effectively divided them, making it impossible to regroup. It was chaos. But then something happened that made Krallis's blood run cold. From the depths of the forest, from behind the veil of trees, a new sound reached his ears. The faintest hum at first, but growing louder, closer. It was mechanical, a low, menacing drone. Krallis's gaze shifted, following the noise as it grew in intensity. And then, emerging from the trees, came the source of the sound. A massive human war machine, unlike anything the Vorkari had ever seen. It was a four-legged mechanical beast, its armored body covered in sleek black plating. Guns mounted to its sides were swiveling, targeting Vorkari fighters. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a war machine. Krallis's breath caught in his throat. This was no mere human ambush. This was an orchestrated assault. The humans had prepared for every possible contingency, every angle of attack. They had even prepared for the Vorkari's most advanced weapons. The war machine's guns opened fire, sending another Vorkari flying, the explosion ripping through his body in an instant. "This is their strength," Vekril whispered, his voice trembling. "This is what we are up against." Krallis's eyes narrowed as he scanned the battlefield. The humans were everywhere now, out of the trees, from the buildings, even emerging from the shadows. It was as though they had sprung from the earth itself, appearing with perfect timing, cutting down the Vorkari without mercy. But despite the overwhelming odds, Krallis refused to give up. The Vorkari had always fought for their pride, their honor. They had never been a species to yield. Even now, as they were outnumbered, outgunned, and caught in a trap, he would not let them fall. He refused to let this be their end. "We fight," Krallis said, his voice low and filled with fury. "We fight until there is nothing left. Honor above all else." Vekril hesitated, looking at Krallis with disbelief. But the sheer force of Krallis's will was impossible to ignore. With a sharp nod, Vekril turned back toward the fight, raising his weapon. The remaining Vorkari followed suit, and the air became thick with the sound of gunfire and the clash of blades. For a few moments, it felt like the tide might turn. The Vorkari were relentless in their assault, their weapons cutting through the humans' ranks. But just as quickly as the momentum shifted, it was lost again. The humans adapted, adjusting their positions, reorganizing themselves with incredible speed. They weren't reacting like prey. They were moving like soldiers, coordinating every move. The human war machine advanced, its massive legs grinding against the dirt as it loomed over the battlefield. Its guns fired in rapid succession, tearing into the Vorkari without mercy. Krallis watched as one of his warriors was struck down, his body thrown aside like a discarded toy. The power behind each shot was unfathomable. And then, just when Krallis thought the situation couldn't get worse, the human leader's voice rang out again, amplified by some kind of speaker. "Your time is up, Vorkari. You've overstayed your welcome." Krallis's eyes locked on the human. There was no fear in his expression, no hesitation, just cold, calculated purpose. The war machine paused, its weapons aimed at the remaining Vorkari. For the first time since the battle began, the human leader lowered his weapon and raised his hand, signaling for his soldiers to cease fire. The silence that followed was deafening. Krallis's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. This was the moment where they either made their stand, or they were wiped out entirely. "Do you understand now?" the human leader asked, his voice smooth and commanding. "This is not a game. This is war. And you're no longer the hunters." The word struck Krallis harder than any blow. He stood there, breath heavy, watching the humans as they closed in on him, ready to end the hunt once and for all. For the first time in his life, he realized that the tables had turned. And this time, the Vorkeri were the prey. As the humans moved in, Krallis clenched his weapon tighter. It wasn't over yet. He wouldn't go down without a fight. Even if he had to face death in the eyes of those who had turned the hunt against him, he would never surrender. Not without giving everything he had. The game was changing, and Krallis could feel it deep in his bones. It was a game they might never win. The silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the distant rumble of the war machine and the faint, almost imperceptible sounds of the human soldiers moving in. Krallis stood at the heart of the battlefield, his weapon raised, his chest heaving with each labored breath. The Vorkeri were dying. He could see it now, their bodies strewn across the ground, their blood mixing with the earth beneath their feet. The air smelled of burnt metal and ash, of the metallic tang of death. The human leader was close now, walking toward him with slow, deliberate steps. Each footfall seemed to echo in Krallis's mind, each one a drumbeat signaling the inevitable end. There was no arrogance in the human's stride, no gloating, just cold, calculated purpose. It was as if he had already won. And Krallis, for the first time in his life, was starting to believe it. He had fought countless battles, faced foes of all kinds, and always emerged victorious. The Vorkeri were predators, the apex hunters of the galaxy. They had wiped out entire species without so much as a second thought, claimed planets as their hunting grounds. But here, in this moment, it felt like everything he had ever known was being ripped away from him. The hunt had always been their domain, their power, their privilege. But now the tables had turned. Now, the Vorkeri were the ones being hunted. Krallis could feel his pride, his honor, slipping away. His mind screamed at him to fight, to resist, to never show weakness. But deep down, in the pit of his stomach, he knew it wouldn't matter. The humans were too strong, too organized, too relentless. They had turned the tables on the Vorkeri in a way that was almost surgical, precise in its execution. And it was working. The Vorkeri were losing, and there was nothing Krallis could do to stop it. The human leader stopped a few feet away from Krallis, his rifle now slung over his shoulder, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. The way he stood, unthreatened, unafraid, sent a jolt of frustration through Krallis. The human wasn't even looking at him with hatred, but with an almost pitying gaze, as if the Vorkeri had been nothing more than an insect to be swatted away. "You don't understand, do you?" the human leader said, his voice low but filled with quiet strength. "This isn't about who's stronger or who's more skilled. It's about who's willing to adapt, to change. And that's where you failed." Krallis's grip tightened on his weapon, his knuckles white. He wanted to lash out, to strike the human down where he stood, but something deep inside him, the part of him that had always been the hunter, held him back. The human's words stung, not just because they were true, but because they reflected everything the Vorkeri had never understood about their enemies. The humans weren't just survivors. They were innovators. They could evolve faster than anything Krallis had ever encountered. The human leader took another step closer, his eyes never leaving Krallis. "You've underestimated us from the start. You thought you were the predators, but you've been the prey all along. We've been watching you, studying you, learning." Krallis growled, his voice a low, guttural sound of frustration and rage. "We don't need to learn. We are the apex." The human shook his head, his expression never faltering. "Not anymore. You were the apex, but that was before you ran into us. We're not just here to fight, Krallis. We're here to show you that survival isn't just about strength or ferocity. It's about knowing when to adapt and when to fight for something more than just your pride." Krallis felt a flicker of doubt stirred deep inside him, but he shoved it aside. He would not yield. He could not. The Vorkari had been the hunters for too long to be made to kneel before anyone, let alone a species they had thought so insignificant, so weak. The human leader's gaze softened, but it was not the softness of compassion. It was the softness of someone who had already won, someone who had accepted the inevitability of what was about to happen. "You don't need to die," the human said, his voice almost a whisper, but Krallis could hear the finality in it. "But you will. You just don't have to die alone." Krallis's heart thundered in his chest, but his pride remained as sharp as ever. He raised his weapon, ready to charge, to fight to the last breath. But just as he took the first step forward, a voice rang out from the distance, cutting through the tension like a knife. "It's over, Krallis." The words were unmistakable, and they carried a weight that made Krallis freeze. He turned toward the source of the voice, his eyes narrowing. Another human, this one younger, more battle-worn, but with the same cold resolve in his eyes, emerged from behind the trees. He was holding another strange weapon, one that Krallis recognized as a modified energy cannon. The weapon hummed with barely contained power, and the air around it seemed to crackle with static. The young human stepped forward, his eyes locking with Krallis's. "You fought bravely, I'll give you that. But it's time to stop. Your people have lost." Krallis felt a surge of anger, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of dread. This was no ordinary human. This was someone who had fought, who had bled alongside his people. His stance was confident, his weapon ready. And there was no hesitation in his eyes. The battle was over. The Vorkari had failed. "Tell me, Krallis," the young human continued, his voice calm, yet filled with a bitter understanding. "How does it feel to be on the other side? To be the one being hunted?" Krallis took a step back, his thoughts racing. The tables had turned, yes, but what could he do now? What could the Vorkari do? He had been wrong. He had underestimated them, underestimated humans. There was no way out, no way to fight back. And then, with one final, merciless motion, the human fired. The energy blast hit Krallis square in the chest, sending him hurtling backward, his body crashing to the ground. The impact was intense, and the world around him spun out of focus. His vision blurred, his breath ragged and shallow. He had never felt this way before. Vulnerable, helpless. For the first time in his life, Krallis felt fear. The human's voice cut through the fog of his mind, as clear and cold as ever. "It's over, Krallis. Your reign as hunters ends here." And in that moment, Krallis understood. The humans had not only defeated them, they had broken them. And nothing would ever be the same again. Krallis's vision slowly returned, blurry at first, then sharpening as he felt the ground beneath him. His body was heavy, weighed down by the injury. His chest burned with each shallow breath, and his limbs trembled. The force of the blast had knocked the fight out of him, but his mind was still racing, still trying to process the impossible reality he found himself in. The Vorkari had always been the hunters. They were the strongest, the deadliest, the apex predators. Now, for the first time, Krallis knew what it felt like to be prey. The world around him seemed eerily quiet now, the sounds of battle gone. He could hear only his ragged breathing and the distant whispers of the wind through the trees. The human who had fired the shot stood a few feet away, his weapon still pointed at Krallis, though there was no longer any need for it. The battle was over. The humans had won. Krallis tried to rise, to fight, but his strength was gone. His body wouldn't respond. The blast had taken too much out of him. His limbs were numb, his head pounding, and the ground seemed to spin beneath him. He collapsed back to the dirt, his chest heaving with the effort to breathe. His blood stained the earth beneath him, a bitter reminder of his failure. The young human took a step closer, his face impassive, though Krallis could sense something else in his eyes. It wasn't victory. It wasn't the satisfaction of a conqueror. It was something else entirely, something Krallis couldn't quite place. "You're not going to die here," the human said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You're going to live. You'll answer for what you did, but you'll live." Krallis's mind reeled. Live? After everything. After what the Vorkari had done. The galaxy had suffered countless atrocities at their hands. Planets had burned. Species had been wiped out. And now, the humans, those soft, fragile creatures Krallis had underestimated, had come and taken everything from him. They had brought the Vorkari to their knees. The human knelt beside him, checking his wounds with practiced efficiency. Krallis felt a strange mix of humiliation and curiosity. The humans had saved him. After all that the Vorkari had done, after the countless lives they had taken, the humans had chosen to save him, to show mercy. "You'll never understand what this feels like," Krallis muttered, his voice hoarse and filled with bitterness. To be so powerless. The human looked at him, eyes softening ever so slightly. "I don't expect you to understand," he said quietly. "But maybe, just maybe, you'll start to see things a little differently now." Krallis clenched his jaw, anger flaring up once again. He hated this. Hated feeling like this. Weak, vulnerable, a failure. But there was no denying it. The humans had not only defeated him, they had shattered everything he had ever known about the galaxy. They had not fought like the Vorkari did, recklessly, brutally, with no thought for the future. No, the humans had fought with purpose, with precision. They had adapted, learned from every mistake, and grown stronger. Why? Krallis managed to rasp. Why save me? After everything. The human paused, then sighed, sitting back on his heels. "Because we don't believe in fighting for the sake of fighting, Krallis, and we don't believe in destruction just for the thrill of it. We fight for the future, for those who can't fight for themselves. We fight to protect the ones we love, and that's something you'll never understand until you've seen it for yourself." Krallis wanted to argue, to refute everything the human had just said, but he couldn't. Deep down, he knew the truth. The Vorkari had fought for power, for dominance, and in the end, they had lost everything. The humans fought for something greater, something Krallis had never truly understood. His breathing grew more labored, and for the first time, he felt the weight of his own mortality pressing in on him. He could feel the cold sweat on his brow, the weakness in his body. The blast had nearly taken his life, and there was no guarantee that he would survive this. "Do you know what it's like?" the human asked softly. "To lose everything. To have the world you knew crumble beneath your feet." "I do. I've been where you are." Krallis looked at him, confused. This human, this young warrior, had been where he was, had felt the fear and the rage, the humiliation of defeat. It didn't make sense. But the look in the human's eyes was real. It wasn't just words. The human had felt something similar. "I was once like you," the human continued. "But I realized something along the way. Power, strength, they're meaningless without purpose, without something to fight for." Krallis's mind raced as the human's words settled in. He had thought power was everything. He had believed that the Vorkari were invincible, that their strength was unmatched. But the humans, they were different. They fought for something greater. They didn't just fight for dominance. They fought for a future. The realization hit Krallis like a lightning bolt. For the first time, he felt the weight of his choices. The lives the Vorkari had taken, the devastation they had caused. It all seemed so hollow now. What had it all been for? To rule over the stars. To be feared. What was the point of power if it only led to destruction? The young human stood, offering Krallis his hand. "It's not too late," he said. "You can choose to make things right. You can choose a different path." Krallis looked up at the human, his body shaking with the effort of staying conscious. He was broken, physically and emotionally, but deep inside, a flicker of something stirred. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. The path ahead was unclear, and the weight of his past sins would not be so easily washed away. But in that moment, for the first time in his life, Krallis didn't feel like a predator. He didn't feel like a conqueror. He felt like a man who had been given a second chance. With great effort, He reached out and took the human's hand, feeling the warmth of it against his own. There was no going back from this. The Vorkari had lost, but maybe, just maybe, there was a future for him too. A future where he could finally understand what it meant to fight for something greater than himself. And that thought, uncertain, fragile, but real, was enough to carry him forward. Krellis woke to the sound of distant voices, soft murmurs that blended with the crackling of a fire. His body ached, every movement sending waves of pain through his limbs. He tried to open his eyes, but they felt heavy, as if the weight of the world rested on his eyelids. Still, he pushed through the discomfort, forcing his eyes open. He was no longer on the battlefield. Instead, he found himself lying on a cot in what appeared to be a human camp. The air was warm, the scent of burning wood filling his nostrils. He could hear the low hum of conversation and the clinking of metal as the humans moved about, tending to their wounds, organizing their equipment. Krellis tried to sit up, but his body refused to cooperate. His chest burned with every shallow breath, and his arms trembled with weakness. He looked down at himself, surprised to find that his injuries had been treated. The gaping wound where the energy blast had struck him was wrapped in bandages, and a strange salve had been applied to it. The pain had dulled, but the weakness remained. He had been saved. The humans had spared him. But why? Why go to all this trouble for him, the leader of the Vorkari, the one who had led his people to conquer and destroy? What possible reason could they have for showing mercy to someone like him? A voice broke through his thoughts. "You're awake." Krellis turned his head, his eyes focusing on the human who stood in the doorway of the small tent. It was the same man, the one who had fired the shot, the one who had defeated him. The human's face was just as impassive as it had been during their encounter on the battlefield, but there was something else in his eyes now. Not pity, not judgment, but something akin to understanding. "How long?" Krellis croaked, his voice rough from the ordeal. 2 days, the human replied, stepping closer. "You've been out for a while. We thought you might not make it." Krellis's heart skipped a beat. 2 days. He had been unconscious for 2 full days, his life hanging in the balance. He had never been so close to death before. It was a sobering thought, and for the first time, he truly understood the fragility of life. His own life, which he had always taken for granted, had been hanging by a thread. "Why?" Krellis asked again, his voice shaking slightly. "Why save me? After everything the Vorkari have done, why spare me?" The human's expression softened, and he knelt beside the cot, his eyes meeting Krellis's with a steady gaze. "Because not all of us are the same, Krellis," he said, his voice calm. "The Vorkari aren't just one thing. They're not all hunters, not all conquerors. Some of you still have the capacity for change." Krellis frowned, confusion clouding his mind. "You think I can change?" he asked, the question feeling foreign to him. He had never considered the possibility that he could change. He had always been a product of his people's ways, of the Vorkari's relentless pursuit of power and dominance. Change had never been an option. The human nodded slowly. "Yes, I think you can. You're alive right now, not because you're some great warrior, but because you're willing to listen. You've seen what we're capable of. And I think you understand that there's more to life than what the Vorkari have been chasing." Krellis's thoughts were in turmoil. What the human said made sense, but it felt wrong. The Vorkari were the apex predators. They were meant to dominate, to rule the galaxy. That was their purpose. But now, standing before this human, after everything that had happened, he wasn't so sure anymore. Could he really change? Could he abandon everything he had ever known? The human's gaze never wavered, and Krellis could sense the sincerity in his words. He wasn't trying to manipulate him. He wasn't offering some false hope. He was simply speaking the truth as he saw it. "I don't know how to change," Krellis admitted quietly. "I don't know what it means to be something else." The human placed a hand on Krellis's shoulder, a gesture of comfort and understanding. "It's not easy," he said, "and it won't happen overnight. But you don't have to do it alone. We're here to help. We've all made mistakes, Krallis, and we're all trying to make up for them, one step at a time. Krallis closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the human's words. He had been so focused on the idea of strength, of power, of conquering everything in his path. But now, as he lay in this strange human camp, he realized that there was another kind of strength, a strength that didn't come from violence or domination, but from the ability to change, to grow, to fight for something greater than oneself. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time, Krallis felt like he was standing at the edge of something new, something he couldn't fully comprehend yet, but something that called to him nonetheless. The human gave him a small smile, as if sensing the shift in Krallis's thoughts. "You'll find your way," he said softly. "It's never too late to make a difference." Krallis didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he might have a chance to find out. The path ahead was unclear, fraught with uncertainty and challenges, but it was his path to choose now. He was no longer a hunter, no longer a predator. He was something new. And as he looked up at the human, a flicker of gratitude sparked deep within him. The humans had shown him mercy, but more than that, they had shown him a new way, a way that didn't rely on power or fear, but on something stronger, something that could endure. "I don't know where this will take me," Krallis said, his voice steady but full of resolve. "But I will find out. And I'll make sure that I never forget the lesson you've taught me." The human nodded, his expression approving. "We'll be here, Krallis, when you're ready." And with that, the two of them sat in silence, the weight of the past slowly lifting, replaced by the quiet hope of what the future could hold. The road ahead would be long, and the scars of the past would never fully fade. But for the first time, Krallis believed that change was possible. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest victory of all.